How does coercion work? How does someone confess to something as grave as murder when in fact they didn't commit the crime? This is a story of a CUNY graduate who became a Pulitzer Prize winner and whose life work has been dedicated to unwinding a person's guilt from their forced and false confessions.
Tom Franklin Sawyer was a landscaper in Clearwater, Florida in 1986 when he was arrested for the murder of Janet Stashak. Sawyer was taken to the police station, interrogated for 16 hours, and denied food, sleep, or water. Eventually, Sawyer confessed to the killing. At the trial, Sawyer's lawyer brought in Richard Ofshe as an expert. He was a sociology professor at the University of California, Berkeley, who had been studying repressed memories and coercion.
At that time, you couldn't find an expert in the United States on the subject of police interrogation.
Ofshe reviewed the interrogation transcripts carefully. The trial summary reads,
"The content of the interrogation is itself fraught with difficulties. The scenario is filled with grossly leading questions put by the detectives, repeatedly suggesting the answer desired or believed correct. The tapes reveal that Sawyer was harangued, yelled at, cajoled, urged approximately 55 times to confess to an accidental killing."
Ofshe's analysis indicated that the confession was coerced out of Sawyer. The verdict? A few years later, Sawyer's confession was thrown out after the court ruled it was coerced. For Richard Ofshe, it was a watershed moment.
This involved people in the worst possible circumstance who would falsely confess to crimes they didn't commit.
For Ofshe, who had graduated from Queens College more than 20 years ago, it was the beginning of a career dedicated to righting the wrongs of wrongful guilty pleas. But before he gained renown as a court expert, he had helped expose a Southern California cult named Synanon. Synanon began as a drug rehab center in California in 1958. But as the center gained popularity into the 1960s and 70s under the leadership of Charles Dietrich, more nefarious things started happening.
People's lives were managed to the point where it was decided whether or not someone could have a child. He forced every married couple to change partners. He basically forced people to choices where they had to choose between loyalty to Synanon or not.
In 1979, the Point Reyes Light, a tiny local newspaper in Northern California, began to investigate Synanon. Working alongside the Light's two owners, David and Kathy Mitchell, Richard revealed what was really happening in Synanon rehab centers: human control, violence, corporal punishment, and forced abortions. The paper went on to publish 7 articles and 13 editorials, exposing the inner workings of the organization, and eventually ended the reign of Charles Dietrich. Synanon was declared a cult, and the IRS forced the closure of the organization on charges of tax evasion. In 1979, the Point Reyes Light and Richard Ofshe won the Pulitzer Prize for public service. After the Synanon expose, Ofshe, now a Pulitzer-winning researcher, shifted to the study of coerced confessions.
Coercion is when you're either offered a benefit or threatened with a harm, depending on whether or not you conform to the demand of the person who's applying the coercion. False confession is when somebody who didn't commit the crime responds to the coercion, either because they become actually convinced that they did commit the crime, which can happen under certain circumstances, or because they realize that if you want to minimize your punishment, this is what you have to do.
Throughout the 1980s, while teaching at UC Berkeley, he worked as a court consultant in a variety of jurisdictions, including the U.S. Attorney's Office of Los Angeles, the IRS, and the Department of Justice. He was exploring more and more deeply what he believed was a flawed system of police interrogation.
When there's a recorded interrogation, the work that I do on it breaks it down to the point where I can identify exactly, step by step, how the belief is built up. I can usually identify the exact statement that finally tips the person to the point where they finally decide to give up. Very often what happens is that the interrogator then attacks the confession they just got to try to get one that actually fits the real facts of the crime.
Ofshe knew that much of what happened in the interrogation room was based on an interrogation practice known as the Reed technique.
The emphasis of the Reed technique is to create an environment that makes it easier for the subject to tell the truth.
In 1997, he published his paper, The Decision to Confess Falsely, Rational Choice and Irrational Action, based on his research into the Reed technique and years of studying the transcripts of interrogations.
It took seeing it over and over again for the pattern to become clear.
In 1990, he was brought on to a case that captured the nation's attention. This was later turned into a film called Forgotten Sins. Paul Ingram had been accused by his daughter of murder and other crimes. Originally, Ofshe worked on the prosecution team. During the drive from the airport, the detective told him about the case.
They hand me the transcript of Ingram's interrogation. I'd never seen a piece of paper on the case. And they tell me I'm scheduled to interview him 3 hours later. I'm able to read the interrogation, and when I read the interrogation, my eyes roll up into the top of my head. I can't believe what I'm reading. What happened to Ingram? He has no memory of having done any of the things he's accused of.
Ofshe conducted his own interrogation of Ingram, fully aware of the techniques used against him that allowed him to visualize his own guilt. He was able to get Paul Ingram to admit to something that Ofshe had made up on the spot. Another case that caught national attention was that of Adrian Thomas in 2009, who was coerced into admitting that he killed his young child. Thomas, caught in a long and Reed-like interrogation, eventually reenacted the violent act that he didn't actually do. Adrian Thomas was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. But after a documentary, Scenes of a Crime, was released about the case, the New York Court of Appeals eventually vacated his sentence, noting that the interrogation was highly coercive.
Once you found the buttons that you need to push, I'm going to arrest your wife. I'm going to separate your children. I'm going to take care of you if you tell a story that satisfies me. Now you've broken them. So you tell them, I want you to stand up and reenact this. Well, they'll stand up and reenact it. Why? Because you now control them.
In his paper, The Decision to Confess Falsely, Rational Choice and Irrational Action, Ofshe wrote what might be his mission statement.
The protection of the innocent is paramount in a criminal justice system whose ideology and rules are predicated on the belief that there can be no worse harm than wrongful conviction and incarceration. Researchers have repeatedly documented the existence of numerous and inexcusable miscarriages of justice arising from police-induced false confessions. We need not tolerate these injustices.
Richard Ofshe continues to advocate for those in the worst possible circumstance, those feeling immense pressure in an interrogation room. He is currently co-writing a book that he hopes will tell the story of coerced testimony, not only the damage it has done over the last 50 years, but what interrogation will look like in the future.